talking to you right outside the Deep State Swamp, Washington, D.C., and we have a very special guest today, someone who was inside that swamp for a while and was, in my view, run out of that swamp because of her honesty and the fact that she was actually fighting for the average people out there. Former Representative Cynthia McKinney, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me to come on. I wish I had been on your inaugural show, but you know, I'm on the other side of the planet. You're deep in the swamp.
That's for sure. I'm close to where you used to be. Well, so is there now? I noticed that you are out of the country quite. Is that by choice? You just like to travel, or you just? A lot of us are. You know, if I had my druthers, I might be out of the country as well too, because we're not too happy with what's going on here. Is there a reason for that, or are you just traveling to various parts of the world you wanted to see?
Well, I'm traveling to various parts of the world that that I've always wanted to see. But the reason I'm here all of the time is because I'm on the Zionist blacklist. And so therefore, I can't, can you imagine that no institution of higher learning wants to hire me to teach the young people? I guess what I have to say is so dangerous to them that they just cannot afford to have me anywhere near the United States. So basically, to survive, because I was honest and I didn't do all of the things that some of the members of Congress have, grown to take for granted when you're there for a long time. So I'm working here and I'm loving it here, although I am a long, long way from home.
You are that. Well, we miss you here, and we certainly miss you in Congress. I've always wondered, I've been a radical for many years. I started out investigating as a teenager in the I'm around your age. In the mid-1970s, I worked for Mark Lane's Citizens Committee of Inquiry. We were trying to get it ended up the JFK assassination and the MLK assassination were reopened, the House Select Committee on Assassinations. We were ultimately disillusioned with that. But having looked at members of Congress and followed politics as long as I have, I never realized, who you were or what you were for a long time until I started reading about you going to JFK assassination conferences. And then when you grilled members of the W. Bush administration after 9/11, I thought, wow, who is this? And it's at a certain point, you got to the point when you left Congress, I just asked myself, how did you ever get in Congress? Did they just not know what they had there? Did they think you were something different than what you were?
Yes, they thought I was different. Well, they knew that I wasn't going to play ball because I didn't sign the pledge. So AIPAC sent a pledge to me. I didn't sign the pledge. So, but I was able to win anyway. I had absolutely $0. I wasn't sponsored by Soros and, like all these other members of Congress got so much money from Soros, the new crowd. I was sponsored by nobody except the people, which is the most important ingredient. So, but when the time came for me to put my name on the line for their agenda, I refused to do it. And that's when basically they realized that I was not going to go with them. And they have all kinds of inducements to encourage you to sign on to their agenda. For example, I had done nothing wrong, so it wasn't about, sort of blackmailing me, finding me catching me in a compromising position or anything like that, which does happen. It does happen. So that's a real aspect of the swamp. But basically what they did was I received phone calls from some noted journalists who are no longer with us, and they would say, when are you going to get on board? When are you going to play ball? You can be in Congress forever. You can die there if you want to. I'll make sure you get put on the cover of Time and Newsweek. You just have to do X and Y. And
Yep.
I never did it. I never ever did it. Now the problem is that was what 27 or so years ago, and so I'm only now getting messages from people saying, I really thought you were crazy, but now I really see who you are. I wish people had known me back then, and I would still be in Congress fighting the good fight. Or at that time, actually, I was even planning my departure and my replacement. So I didn't intend to stay there forever. But the point is that I would have been able to stay there long enough to say derail the Iraq War, for example, because the person that was handpicked by Rahm Emanuel to replace me voted for the Iraq War funding, and I would have voted against it, and the bill itself passed only with the requisite number of votes. Had I been there voting my no vote, that bill to fund the Iraq War would have failed. That's how important my presence there could have been to us, and we would be having a completely different conversation than we are having right now.
Absolutely. Well, when you say X and Y, like that, and you said you didn't get on board with the AIPAC and this blind subservience to Israel that we see all in Congress and have seen in Congress forever. Was that the main issue? Was Israel the main issue, or the fact that you were against the Iraq War? What was the main thing they were telling you? The journalists saying get on board. What were they telling you had to do to get on Time, the cover of Time and Newsweek?
Well, basically, there's like lots of things that you are required to do. These small votes that you're required to cast just because you're there in the body, and but it's to support Israel bombing Gaza. It's just everything that they have, and these silly pieces of legislation that are like that, affirming Israel's right to this. I mean, it's like zillions of these kinds of bills that pop up from out of nowhere, and you're expected to just blindly vote yes on them. And that basically is what your time in the Congress consists of, voting yes on all the silly little belligerent pieces of legislation that support Israel's wars against this person and wars against that person. Like, for example, the very first bill that was voted on in the House was the anti-Semitism envoy bill. So the appointment by the Secretary of State of an anti-Semitism envoy to dictate basically who's anti-Semitic around the world, as if that is an appropriate function of the United States government. So that's one thing. And it just goes on and on and on and on. The second thing is the first bill in the U.S. Senate, which is the anti-BDS bill. So if you speak out in support of boycott, divestment, and sanctions for Israel, then you lose your job. Well, that sounds familiar because I lost mine.
Yeah, that's awful. Well, what were you? Did you feel? Again, you were obviously such a rarity to me as just a student of politics. You stood out so starkly. I mean, there's so few people that have been like you. I mean, I can think of one time Jim Trafficant, who was run out of Congress.
Yes.
It was an independent. You had Ron Paul on the other side, Dennis Kucinich. But you were kind of, I think, in a class by yourself. Did you, especially in the Black Caucus, did you have anybody standing with you, or did they all kind of turn on you and you were just kind of left blown in the wind by yourself?
They turned on me, and in fact, when you think about all of the outrage about Hurricane Katrina, and there was this
Yes,
and there was
yes.
that and all of that. And so then I said, okay, well, let's put the outrage to work and actually produce some results for the people, some positive results for the people. And the members of the Congressional Black Caucus refused to cooperate. I mean, it's just amazing. They, to a person, they just decided that they were not going to participate in the Hurricane Katrina panel that had been set up. And I have one experience with that when it was Maxine Waters. I'm trying to recruit members of the Congressional Black Caucus to sit on this special panel that's been formed for Hurricane Katrina. And I go and I'm recruiting all of the CBC members to participate. And Nancy Pelosi had sent the diktat down that no Democrat is going to participate in this committee. It was a special committee. And so when I get to Maxine, I ask Maxine, and Maxine says, Cynthia, you just have to understand that when the leadership tells us to do something, we're going to do it.
That's why she's still there and you're not, I guess. But I know, I remember Maxine Waters during the time of, as you know, in Hidden History, I wrote about many things, but I wrote about Gary Webb and his exposure of the crack cocaine coming into the inner cities. And for a brief period of time, I don't know if you were in Congress then, the Black Caucus was up in arms briefly about that. They go, and Maxine Waters was at the front. But what I found amazing is after I think they killed Gary Webb, shot him. He said he shot himself twice in the head. But after he died, I didn't hear any more furor. To me, why wasn't there an investigation after that? Because the guy who exposed this died, and yet they had been upset briefly. But there was no kind of outrage after he died, and then we saw what happened with the explosion of even more drugs, and then Bill Clinton's three strikes you're out and mandatory sentencing law, which put half of Black America in prison. I didn't see any outrage from Democrats, even the Black Caucus over that. I'm sure you were probably looking at it in panel, but I didn't see that much of that in Congress.
I actually had asked Gary Webb to come to D.C. and work on my congressional staff. So, yeah, I mean, that's just one of those little tidbits of a footnote in history that very few people know about. And, well, it's never been published, I guess. But, yeah, I wanted him. Maybe it would have been a little bit more difficult to get to him if he had been in D.C. But he was in the process of, I believe, getting a divorce, and he didn't want to be far away from his children, and that's why he turned me down.
That's what I find so refreshing about you is that you aren't part of any groupthink at all. You are totally independent. You don't really fall into this identity politics, and that's why I get in so many arguments with people on the left, because I hate political correctness. And I mean, I know no one writes more about police brutality than I do. Police are out of control. They should have had congressional hearings about it a long time ago, but you don't selectively take one case here or there and just try to make it into a racial issue, because then what happens? White America sides with the police because they're tired of hearing everything's racist. Instead, just talk about how out of control it is. I mean, Rodney Thomas was white and they beat him to death, and a jury found him not guilty. So, speak how that. I'm sure you must have really ran into a lot of conflict with all the Democrats, really. The fact that you weren't kind of going along in this social identity politics, which is, you see where it's led now, where it's it's all about transgender bathrooms, and nobody seems to care about civil liberties anymore, or the fact we're losing our rights.
Well, how can I respond to that except to say that I had a very good upbringing and a great training from my dad, and basically, well, one thing that my dad told me is that I'll always be an outsider, no matter how. Once I got elected to the Congress, that was the message. That was his message. You're not one of them. You'll never be one of them.